Lieutenant Commander Daniel Rourke was the epitome of discipline and dedication. Standing tall on the deck of the USS Theodore Roosevelt, he was every inch the decorated Navy officer, a man who had given 20 years of his life to serve his country. At 42, Daniel had everything a man could want: a loving wife, 2 sons who adored him, and a home that symbolized stability and comfort in Hyde Park, Chicago. His wife, Lila, was as perfect a partner as Daniel could imagine. She was vivacious, intelligent, and beautiful, a self-made interior designer whose creativity brought life to every room she touched. Together, they were a picture of success, hosting barbecues on weekends and attending charity galas that showcased Lila's keen aesthetics. Their 2 sons, Mason and Caleb, were the joys of Daniel's life. Mason, 10, shared Daniel's calm demeanor, while 8-year-old Caleb was a bundle of energy who could light up any room. Daniel worked tirelessly to ensure his family never wanted for anything, and when he wasn't at sea, he immersed himself in family life, helping with school projects, attending games, and carving out precious moments with Lila. Yet cracks were beginning to form beneath the surface. Daniel couldn't quite place what was off. Lila had become slightly more distant, her phone often buzzing with messages she dismissed too quickly. But Daniel, trusting to a fault, attributed it to her busy work life. The one person who seemed always dependable was Ben Keller, Daniel's best friend since high school. Ben, a successful realtor, was like a brother to Daniel and had stepped in during his long deployments. Whether it was fixing a broken fence or taking the boys out for ice cream, Ben had become an extension of the Rourke family. But while Daniel saw Ben as an ally, he couldn't see what was happening right under his nose. Lila Rourke was a woman torn between duty and desire. Her life with Daniel had been built on a solid foundation of love and respect, but after years of his absence during deployments, loneliness began to creep in. Daniel was a good man, but the long stretches apart left Lila feeling like a ghost in her own marriage. When Ben Keller entered her life in a more intimate way, it was as if a light had been switched on. He had always been around as Daniel's best friend, but Lila hadn't noticed how his easy humor and warm presence filled the void left by her husband's absence. What started as late-night talks and shared laughs turned into something far more dangerous. One fateful evening, Lila found herself unable to resist the pull of Ben's comfort. She convinced herself it was a moment of weakness, but that night quickly turned into many. Over the years, their affair became a complicated routine: secret rendezvous, shared glances at family gatherings, and covert text messages. Despite her attempts to compartmentalize her life, Lila struggled with guilt. She often looked at Mason and Caleb, the sons she shared with Daniel, and felt the weight of her betrayal. What made it worse was the undeniable resemblance between Mason and Ben, a resemblance she prayed Daniel would never notice. Ben, too, was trapped in the web of deception. He was deeply in love with Lila, but his growing attachment to the boys complicated his emotions. He wasn't just Lila's lover, he was also their father. The burden of the secret was a constant shadow over their illicit relationship, and both Ben and Lila knew it was only a matter of time before their perfect facade would crack. Daniel Rourke had always prided himself on being a man of integrity and intuition. As a decorated Navy officer, his life revolved around discipline and order, and he expected the same from his personal relationships. However, his return from his most recent deployment brought an unfamiliar tension to his family life. It wasn't just the occasional awkward silences or Lila's uncharacteristic evasiveness, it was something deeper, an instinct telling him that all was not as it seemed. The first crack in the facade came one sunny Saturday afternoon. Daniel was in the backyard tossing a baseball with Mason. The boys had inherited their parents' athleticism, but Mason in particular had a natural skill that always impressed Daniel. As Mason effortlessly threw a perfect curveball, Daniel asked where he'd learned the technique. "Uncle Ben showed me," Mason replied nonchalantly. Daniel froze. He knew Ben Keller, his best friend since boot camp, wasn't a baseball enthusiast, let alone someone who could teach such a technical pitch. While Mason continued to chatter, Daniel's mind raced. Why would Ben be spending enough time with Mason to teach him something so specific? A few weeks later, Daniel noticed another inconsistency. Lila had become more guarded with her phone, often placing it face down on the kitchen counter or taking calls in another room. When Daniel casually mentioned wanting to surprise her at work one evening, her reaction was far from enthusiastic. "Oh, you don't have to do that," she said quickly, her smile strained. The unease in her voice lingered in his mind long after the conversation ended. Determined to get answers, Daniel began quietly observing Lila's behavior. One evening, when she left her phone unattended, he accessed her messages. While he didn't find explicit evidence of an affair, the tone of her conversations with Ben was unusually personal. He also noticed a series of deleted messages, which only deepened his suspicions. The final blow came when Daniel stumbled upon an old family photo album. As he flipped through pictures of birthday parties and holiday gatherings, he noticed a pattern. Ben was present in almost every significant moment. In many photos, his interactions with Lila seemed unusually close. But it wasn't just their dynamic that caught Daniel's attention. It was Mason's resemblance to Ben. The shape of his jawline, the curve of his nose, even the color of his eyes. Unable to shake the gnawing doubt, Daniel ordered DNA tests for both Mason and Caleb, collecting their samples under the guise of a science project. When the results arrived, they confirmed his worst fear: neither boy was biologically his. Armed with the truth, Daniel's mind shifted from confusion to anger. He began meticulously piecing together the timeline of Lila and Ben's betrayal. He scoured bank statements, tracking unexplained charges that coincided with Ben's visits. Phone records showed late-night calls and frequent texts exchanged between Lila and Ben. Daniel confronted Lila one evening, his calm demeanor masking the storm brewing inside him. "Are the boys mine?" he asked, his voice low and steady. Lila's face paled. "What are you talking about?" she stammered. Daniel handed her the DNA test results. "Don't lie to me, Lila. I already know." Tears streamed down her face as she confessed to the affair. She tried to explain it away as a mistake, blaming Daniel's long absences for her loneliness. But Daniel wasn't interested in excuses. The betrayal wasn't just about Lila's infidelity, it was about the family he had devoted his life to. A family built on lies. Daniel's confrontation with Ben was far more volatile. He cornered Ben at a local bar, slamming a photo of Mason and the DNA results onto the table. "You betrayed me," Daniel growled, his fists clenched. "You didn't just take my wife, you took my family." Ben tried to defuse the situation, claiming it had been a mistake. But Daniel's icy glare made it clear there was no forgiveness to be had. Daniel left the bar that night with a singular focus: retribution. Daniel Rourke's plan for revenge began to take shape the moment he uncovered the truth about Lila and Ben. The betrayal wasn't something he could simply move past. It had consumed him, turning every waking moment into a bitter reminder of the life he'd been robbed of. But Daniel was a man of precision, trained to handle high-stakes situations. This wasn't going to be a spur-of-the-moment act. It would be methodical, calculated, and definitive. The idea of a reunion came to him as the perfect ruse. Daniel reached out to Lila and Ben, framing the invitation as an opportunity to bury the past and move forward for the sake of the boys. He suggested a weekend at the family's secluded lake house in Michigan, a place that once held fond memories of happier times. Lila, eager to smooth things over and alleviate her guilt, agreed without hesitation. Ben, more reluctant, eventually gave in, seeing it as a way to placate both Lila and Daniel. The lake house stood isolated, shrouded in tall pines and far from prying eyes. Daniel arrived first, preparing the cabin with meticulous detail. He checked the generator, stocked the fridge, and ensured the cellar, rarely used, was accessible. There was no cell service in the area, which suited Daniel perfectly. When Lila and Ben arrived, they found Daniel in high spirits, cooking dinner and playing music from an old stereo. The tension was palpable, but Daniel's easy demeanor put them slightly at ease. Over wine and a hearty meal, he spoke about rebuilding trust and focusing on the future. He raised a glass in a toast. "To new beginnings," he said. Lila and Ben hesitated but eventually clinked glasses with him. Later that evening, Daniel suggested they head down to the cellar to grab a special bottle of wine he had saved from their wedding anniversary. The cellar, accessed through a narrow staircase at the back of the house, was cold and dimly lit. Daniel led the way, flashlight in hand. Once inside, he motioned for them to wait while he searched for the bottle. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind them. The sound of a lock clicking into place echoed through the room. Panic set in as Ben lunged for the door, realizing it was secured from the outside. "Daniel, what the hell are you doing?" Ben shouted, pounding on the heavy wooden door. From the other side, Daniel's voice was calm. "You both made your choices. Now it's time for me to make mine." Lila screamed, pleading with him. "Daniel, please. Think of the boys." "I did think of them," he replied. "Every day. While I was thousands of miles away, serving this country, you two were playing house behind my back." Inside the cellar, Ben and Lila scrambled to find a way out. The room was windowless, with concrete walls and a dirt floor. There was no escape. Daniel had already prepared the final step. Outside the cellar, he had rigged a mechanism to begin flooding the space with dirt from an old chute once used for coal delivery. It was slow but steady. He had made sure it would take hours, long enough for them to understand what was happening, long enough for the gravity of their betrayal to settle in. Back upstairs, Daniel poured himself a drink. He sat on the porch, staring out at the lake. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a golden glow over the water. Inside the cellar, muffled screams and desperate cries echoed upward but were soon replaced by silence. Daniel left the lake house later that morning, resolute. When friends and family reported Lila and Ben missing, Daniel played the concerned husband and loyal friend. He gave statements, participated in search efforts, and even comforted the boys with a steady hand. But the investigation would eventually catch up with him. Weeks later, inconsistencies in his story raised red flags. Authorities began piecing together surveillance footage, tracking phone pings, and questioning neighbors near the lake house. It wasn't long before a cadaver dog led investigators to the cellar, where they uncovered the harrowing scene. Daniel Rourke was arrested at his home without incident. During his interrogation, he offered no resistance, no denial. "They had a choice," he said simply. "Now they can be together forever." The trial was swift and sensational. Headlines across the nation painted him as a tragic figure turned monster. Some called him a victim of betrayal pushed too far. Others saw a cold-blooded killer hiding behind a uniform. Daniel was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. To this day, he has never shown remorse. As time passed, the story of the Daniel family became part of Chicago's criminal history, a study in how betrayal, obsession, and revenge can destroy lives. But it was also a story of resilience, how two boys survived unimaginable trauma and built meaningful lives out of their wreckage. Mason and Caleb established a foundation that supported children affected by domestic violence and parental loss, something that had been close to their hearts. The lake house property, once the scene of such horrific crimes, was demolished. In its place stood a memorial garden where purple irises, Layla's favorite flower, bloomed each spring. Mason, now studying psychology at Northwestern, helped counsel youth trauma survivors, and Caleb wore his father Daniel's Navy number on his baseball jersey as a tribute to the man he never really knew, but whose memory he had embraced in a way Daniel's best friend Ben Keller never could. The Daniel Family Foundation's motto, chosen by Mason and Caleb, read, "Truth buried deep grows toward the light." And in their mother's restored garden, new flowers bloomed each year, just as they had learned that life, no matter how soaked in tragedy, persists. Beauty finds a way to grow. Viewers, what drives a person to go to such extreme lengths, to betray the very people they claim to love? Is it the overwhelming weight of their own pain, or perhaps the temptation to take control of a situation that feels entirely out of their hands? How does someone justify taking another's life, even when consumed by rage, jealousy, or betrayal? Is it possible that, in the heat of the moment, the line between right and wrong becomes so blurred that a person loses themselves entirely? Or is there something deeper, a darkness lurking beneath the surface that drives them to commit an irreversible act? What makes someone choose revenge over healing? And why do they continue to perpetuate a lie, even when the truth is far more destructive? How can a person live with themselves after deceiving the very people who trust them, even when they know the cost will be immense? Is it guilt, fear, or a need to protect themselves from the fallout that keeps them locked in a web of falsehoods? How do we reconcile the love we feel for someone with the undeniable darkness they may harbor deep inside? Is it possible to forgive the unforgivable, or are some betrayals too deep to heal? When faced with the collapse of everything they once knew, how do two boys torn apart by tragedy rebuild their lives from the ashes? Can they ever truly break free from the weight of their past, or are they destined to carry that legacy forever? What does it take to survive when your world has been shattered, your family torn apart, and your innocence stolen? Is resilience enough to overcome such deep scars, or do the remnants of the past always linger, no matter how much time passes? And when the dust finally settles, when the truth is uncovered and all the pieces fall into place, do we ever truly understand why it all happened? Or do we simply learn to accept it? To live with the wreckage, knowing that some things are beyond our control? Perhaps we never fully comprehend the depths of the choices others make. But in time, we come to realize that the healing process isn't just about finding answers. It's about learning to live with the pain, finding meaning in the darkness, and hoping that one day, the light will return. If this story shocked you, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Unfolded Enigmas.